Welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast for leaders and founders under pressure.
This podcast is your pause. Walk away feeling lighter, clearer, and more confident in the way you lead and live.
My name is Khurshid Zainuddinov. I'm an independent board director, an executive and leadership coach.
And I'm Anastasia Lynch, an IT entrepreneur and an executive coach.
We're experiencing at the moment the consequences of not adapting, having systems that aren't flexible, having management styles that are taken out of books that have been written 70 years ago, and the consequences that our relationships, our grievances, disputes, any of you lawyers listening will know, employment tribunals. We're talking about hundreds of % increases over the last few years. About a third of organizations are saying that they're currently going through a dispute. So we're seeing the consequences at the moment. And for any manager that has been through that, you don't want to do that again. It's a no-win situation.
Good morning to everyone. Hi, we have two distinguished guests today, Liv Blaney and Sam Pringle. Liv is a leadership coach and a group coach, extensive experience in investment banking, ex-Goldman Sachs. Sam Pringle is a coach and supervisor for coaches and lots of experience in pharmaceutical industry. And together, Liv and Sam, they're working on a book that we're going to discuss today.
Liv and Sam, obviously, Khurshid has made lovely introduction, but anything that he might have missed, any things that you would like for people to know about you personally that we haven't touched upon?
Well, yeah, when you mentioned that about pharmaceuticals, that just seems like a lifetime ago. So I was in pharma as the first part of my corporate career, and then I went into the third sector. So after I had my two children, I went into the third sector and I was a CEO there and also head of research as well. So I kind of had two careers as I see it, alongside my coaching career as well.
I kind of now identify as a coach and group coach, training facilitator, and now, as you say, a co-author of this book that we're releasing.
And I haven't identified with the co-author part yet.
One day you will. One day you will adopt it as part of your identity.
I'm pretty sure when everyone is gonna, start talking about your book, it will feel probably natural. So let's talk about the book. The name of the book is Neuroinclusion, a guide for leaders and managers. So how did this book come about?
So just to give a bit of background to Sam and I, because as we've said, we kind of come from different worlds, and Sam lives in Scotland and I live in England. So there's no natural way for us to kind of meet. When I first set myself up as a coach a few years back after I left investment banking, I was meeting with a few companies to see what work I could do with them. And one of the ladies that I met, when we started talking about neurodiversity, so I did some research in neurodiversity as part of my degree, and when we started talking about neurodiversity, she said, "Oh, you should meet Sam. You've got some things in common." And so this is really a story about the power of networking, because then a couple of emails later, Sam and I found some time on the phone and found that we did have some things in common, primarily a desire to improve things for neurodivergent individuals, primarily in the workplace, given some of the challenges that people can face. And we discussed a few different options as to what we might do about that. I think most of the ideas from memory were a lot lighter weight and shorter term than writing a book, but somehow, I don't know quite why, we decided that writing a book was the way forwards. And then, and then I think once Sam managed to get Routledge to agree to publish the book, actually, then we realized that we better get on with it and actually deliver on it. So that's kind of how we started off. So it's really a story about the power of networking and shared interests in getting you to sign up to to write a book.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I think a lot of people could relate about power of networking, because we do tend to find these people in the oddest situations, in oddest places, oftentimes places we would have never looked before. Now, Sam, to you, looking at the book, at the topic that connected you and Liv together, what are the key challenges for neurodiverse people and their managers in the workplace right now?
Well, I think one of the main reasons why we started writing the book for me was because at that particular time I was working with an organization, and they were telling me they just didn't know what to do about people that are coming forward and identifying as neurodivergent managers, employees, and that real state of not knowing and not feeling confident. High number of grievances, difficulties in relationships, burnout, unfortunately, a lot of the consequences of not knowing and unmanaged neurodivergence within the workplace. So I think that's certainly a key challenge at the moment as far as mental health is concerned, as far as performance is concerned. And for managers, it's been very much a lack of confidence and knowledge about how they're showing up and also how they can support and get the best out of their teams. And I think part of the problem too is that we're all coming to terms with this ourselves. And I say ourselves because part of the story of me writing the book is reflecting back on my first career in pharmaceuticals and some of the patterns that showed up for me, the difficulties I had on training courses, recall, part of what I was going through at that time as far as perimenopause was concerned. And again, remembering things, emotional regulation, all of these things I was starting to put together. And I see this a lot with my coaches as well, just connecting the dots and trying to make sense, and managers trying to make sense of their team and individuals trying to do that. So I think at the moment we're in a kind of discovery phase around neurodivergence within the workplace. And I know certainly I've been through that myself.
Add to that, because I think there's, to Sam's point, there's a lot of lack of knowledge. And I think the lack of knowledge by managers and workplaces creates assumptions, and assumptions about how people should operate or how people could operate. And that's really simple things that impact people's careers and reputation. So things like switching the camera off when you're on a video call. I always hear people saying, oh, well, you're just kind of making an assumption that someone is doing the laundry in the background. And actually it might be because they need to move around to burn off energy, or it might be because they actually don't need they don't need or want the sensory input that comes from the screen. So often that lack of knowledge creates assumptions, which then might mean that someone's reputation or career is damaged, or the dynamic between individuals, the relationships, gets impacted. And so for me, that's one of the biggest impacts, and certainly something that I've seen across my career.
And thank you so much for sharing this. Right now, the listeners who are tuned to this conversation of ours, especially leaders, what can they do to improve the situation and be more inclusive?
So actually, I feel like we should probably take a bit of a step back, because there may be some people who are less familiar with the kind of concept of neurodiversity. So it's probably worth us kind of defining what we mean by that. Neurodiversity is intended to be this kind of umbrella term associated with different neurological conditions, for want of a better word. Typically that includes things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or autism, or dyslexia, or dyspraxia, that kind of set of conditions, which typically indicate that people's brains operate in a way that is classed as being outside of the norm. Now, or the norm or the typical, however you want to phrase it. And so that's the kind of group of things that we're talking about. Now, I think your question is, what can managers do about it? Where you have people who are different to others in any way, whether that's neurologically different or operating differently or thinking differently, the key thing is to try and understand the world from their perspectives and what they need in order to be able to be at their best. So as a manager, at a very simplistic level, your job is to make sure that people can be at their best. In order to do that, asking them what they need in order to be at their best, trying to accommodate them, trying to put in place what they need, and tailoring the work that they do around their strengths and their potential challenges is super important. A lot of what underlies that is a need to be empathetic with people, to understand and kind of be able to walk in their shoes. And so in answer to the question, what can managers do? At the core of that is empathy, and then understanding what people need in order to be able to be at their best. And often people don't know what they need, but often managers don't even have that conversation with people. That's what I would say. Sam, is there anything that you would add to that?
I think what I could add to that is around sometimes the assumption is it's all about the neurotypicals doing something for the neurodivergents. And it's almost like a them and us, but actually these differences happen across the spectrum. And I don't even want to, I like to almost keep away from diagnosis or the conditions, because I think most of the time we don't actually know what these differences are. We don't have access, certainly in the UK, to a diagnosis a lot of the time. We don't really understand our brains. Apparently still we only understand about 2% of our brains. So the fact that we've got labels and conditions, I think they're going to be out of date within the next 5-10 years. So the individual will know what it is that they need, as Liv said. So taking time to ask them what it is that they need that would make them more productive is certainly really helpful. And that could be an ADHD and an autistic individual. It could be a dyslexic speaking to someone with Tourette. It doesn't matter about what the label is. It's just us having this human to human conversation about what can I do that would help you?
Thank you. And I realized probably the question I should have asked, not what can leaders do, but who can leaders be in order to be more inclusive, I guess, because we're talking about treating everyone like human beings, being patient, listening, empathetic, and all that things that many places might be missing nowadays with all this rush to improve bottom line, to achieve KPIs, to increase revenues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I've learned through this process, and I'm learning all the time, is that personalization. Everything is personalized nowadays. And that personalization is key. And, we might believe that it's going to create extra work, but actually in the longer term, it's going to save us time and resources, and most of all, relationships, because that's what I think Liv and I see a lot, is when relationships break down, and yourselves as coaches, we get called in when relationships break down, and that's the key to business.
Talking of resources as well, a lot of leaders, a lot of managers, when they hear any conversations about neurodiversity, neuroinclusion, a first sort of a bell that rings is the resources, the time. Do we have it? Where can we get it? And at the end of the day, is it even worth it? Would you be able to outline the benefits, the clear benefits? What would benefit the company, the teams, if they did adapt this approach?
Well, I think we're experiencing at the moment the consequences of not adapting, having systems that aren't flexible, having management styles that are taken out of books that have been written 70 years ago, and the consequences that our relationships, grievances, disputes. If you lawyers listening will know, employment tribunals, we're talking about hundreds of % increases over the last few years. About a third of organizations are saying that they're currently going through a dispute. So we're seeing the consequences at the moment. And for any manager that has been through that, you don't want to do that again. It's a no-win situation. So just taking time, stepping back, accepting mistakes, apologizing, being okay with not getting it right first time. We talk about understanding, but still have it's really difficult to really understand what's going on for other people. And most people won't disclose. They won't disclose they're neurodivergent. They won't disclose necessarily what's going on in their wider life. And sometimes that's a good thing, because our biases have us believe, well, if that's going on for them, they're not going to be focused on our work. And I have that experience from having worked with parents in the workplace, carers in the workplace as well. We know that their performance reviews are going to be marked down if they disclose at the level of difficulty that they might be going through. So though in an ideal world, we would want people to disclose some of the struggles that they have, we also want to have an inclusive culture where people can just not necessarily disclose what difficulties they're having, but what would help them right now to do a great job. So That, I think, is an enormous benefit, is that we don't have to go through the pain of what we're going through a lot of the time at the moment.
A lot of the things that Sam is talking about and that organizations need, they don't cost money. Actually, you look at the majority of things that are required in order to make organizations neuro-inclusive. Better managerial skills, capabilities, personalization, flexible working hours. These things don't cost a lot. Actually, sometimes they cost very little. It's about putting the focus in the right areas. I genuinely think that actually if managers were trained to build trust and rapport and empathy and personalize their managerial approach, that a large chunk of these kind of challenges might go away. There will always be things that might be required in addition, but a good proportion of this is about one-to-one relationships, and that's free to fix. The other thing that I would add is from an organisational perspective, there is funding available in the UK anyway for some of the accommodations that might be required. So if there's additional assistive technology that people need. So it may not even necessarily mean that the company needs to pay for it. So when people say it takes more money to be able to accommodate, gee, that's not always the case. It takes a bit of time and focus and effort and potentially some culture change and some managerial skill uplift.
And I think also sometimes the fear of the unknown, because managers not always versed in the topic, they haven't been trained how to handle any of these situations. Sometimes that fear alone can be covered up by we don't have resources, we don't have time. But actually, it's great that you have highlighted all the resources that are available and all the things that they can do with little money or no money at all to make the change.
Yeah. I think in one of the surveys that I've seen, the number one thing that most people wanted who were neurodivergent or who identified as being neurodivergent was flexibility around working hours and location. So for companies who are pushing people back into the office, they might just want to reconsider whether that's something that they want to do. Or for companies who mandate a 9-to-5 job, actually, does it really need to be 9 to 5, or can we be a little bit more flexible with the hours that we expect people to work? So simple things like that can make a world of difference.
On the one hand, we have an issue where up to a third of companies are going through some sort of grievances because they haven't provided sufficient resources and created suitable conditions for their employees. On the other hand, to fix those things doesn't necessarily cost tons of money. Sometimes it's just simple adjustment. So given this, where do you see this topic as a priority for strategy and policy in the companies?
I think many larger organizations have got it on the table at the moment. Unfortunately, they've learned often the hard way. For smaller organizations, they're starting to get their head around it. So I think we're kind of halfway as far as strategy is concerned, certainly in the UK. But, colleagues of mine tell me that the UK is far ahead of many other countries. I don't have enough experience. Certainly, we can see more inclusive cultures like the Nordics. Again, coming from a cultural, inclusive background really helps, because that inclusivity, it covers so many things, not just neurodivergence. And, I read a really nice report recently about burnout, autistic burnout from Australia as well. So I hear that that's becoming more of a strategic conversation that folk are having. And, we hope that within the next 5 years, this won't be an add-on, a bolt-on, because it almost feels like it's a bit of a bolt-on at the moment, but it's going to be running through all of their policies and all of the management training. So, we're not going to do additional training as we're doing at the moment around neuro-inclusive leaders. It's going to be part of the foundation of managing people. So it's on the agenda. It just hasn't been integrated into everything and all the systems yet.
I think it's also worth noting that when we think about, so as Sam mentioned, neurodiversity at the moment is more front of mind for more Western cultures. And often there are cultural and social factors that factor into why it's not so front of mind in some other cultures and locations. So a simple example is that some of the neurodivergent traits that people might experience it from a Western perspective as being different to the way in which people would usually work, they're not seen as different in other cultures, and so therefore they might not be picked up. So things like eye contact. In Western cultures, we typically expect people to make eye contact regardless. And for some autistic individuals or individuals with autism in particular, that can be uncomfortable. In other cultures, actually, eye contact isn't so required. And so that wouldn't be picked up, wouldn't be noticed, wouldn't be seen as a challenge. And so different cultures have different expectations which impact the extent to which neurodiversity might be identified, picked up, or experienced as a challenge.
And with the neurodiverse culture, if there is already a plan in place, people should know how to do it. It's just not being integrated. But what would that neuro-inclusive culture look like for a workplace, for maybe a team ran by a manager that was well-versed on the topic?
So the first thing to say is that the research in this space would suggest that where you have inclusive teams, they are more productive, more creative. And there's certainly some research by Deloitte that gave out a kind of 30% more productive number for inclusive teams across all kinds. But it has to be where that diversity is included. It can't just be as a result of being a diverse team. So there's definitely a commercial benefit there. I would also say, though, actually, what we're proposing is not about what our suggestion is in terms of how you create neuro-inclusion. Doesn't necessarily make things better just for the neurodivergent individuals in a team. It makes it better for everyone. Managers who have better managerial capabilities, better ability to build trust, rapport, empathize, to understand their team members and to personalize the approach that they take, that benefits everyone. And so the outcome of that is ultimately a happier, more engaged, more motivated team that is almost certainly more productive and more likely to hang around. So less recruiting time, less time performance managing, all of that kind of stuff starts to fall away if you manage to achieve this more neuro-inclusive culture.
Yeah, and I think for me, a neuro-inclusive culture looks like one which is curious, which is constantly solving problems, which is not pretending they know, and not doing the same thing time and time again. So learning, relearning, unlearning. And, I think I've learned so much from my children and how I see them solving problems at school, both of them being neurodivergent. And in fact, our local council introduced iPads a few years back, and I was appalled. I wanted my children to sit there with the book and I wanted them to write, even though both of them have had illegible writing and struggled with their reading. But that's what I was told success looked like. So I wanted to fit in and I wanted my kids to fit in. But actually, a decision that they made at the council level, the organizational level, to bring in iPads has revolutionized their learning. They learn through films, they're interactive, they've got 10 tabs open, they're drawing pictures. That's the way that they learn best. And, I'm fortunate enough that I wasn't head of that organization to make that decision. But I think just because we did something, or I did something as a leader in a certain way, being open that actually we can be brave enough, curious enough to do things a different way, I think is a great advantage of having an inclusive culture. And isn't that exciting that we're not all just doing the same things the same way?
Exactly. In this current dynamic world, I just wanted to ask you something. The impression I'm getting, and correct me if I'm wrong, is neuro-inclusion is not a narrow thing where you protect people who are different than the mainstream, right? It's a wider view. It's going to improve everyone's life. It's going to be beneficial holistically on a wholesome level for everyone. The features that you both are mentioning are good features of any good manager in any condition. So being curious, adaptive, listening to others, it helps companies to adapt to the current world, regardless of whether they have any neurodivergent people as part of their staff. And right now, especially, it's probably hard to avoid. If you're a large company, you would get people who are neurodivergent?
Completely. These kind of practices help everyone across the team. And that's great in itself. But also, as Sam mentioned earlier, it's all the more important because there are many people who don't realize, have never thought about being neurodivergent or having a neurodivergent condition, haven't been diagnosed or don't want to disclose. And so actually, none of this should require a special treatment of anyone. It's not about that. It's about creating the culture and the mindset for managers and leaders that helps people to be at their best. And I guess to your point, when you think about the numbers of people who are neurodivergent in the workplace, it's thought to be between 10 and 20% of your population. So assuming that you're working in a company that's more than 4 people, you will almost certainly have someone who is neurodivergent in some way in your company. So it's not even just for large companies, because actually what we need to do is to take into account those rates.
Quick question about the book, about the timing. If someone is itching to buy your book, what is the timeline? Where can they get this book? Tell us more, because I will be probably one of your first readers, given that, I'm also very much interested in the topic of neuroinclusion and neurodiversity.
Well, let me...
March.
March.
2026, March. We're hopeful.
We're currently hoping to release it in line with Neurodiversity Celebration Week, which is in the middle of March. And I guess just to give a bit more context on the book, as you said at the start, it's Neuroinclusion, a guide for leaders and managers. It is intended to both give the kind of level of awareness of different neurodivergent conditions, some of the strengths that come with each of them, but also give managers some practical tools and techniques to use with their team to help to embed kind of best practices, get the most out of everyone, as well as addressing some of the challenges that people might experience that they might also need to be aware of. So it helps people to reflect on where they are, what they might do differently, and gives them some practical things that they can take away and apply with their team and optimize their management and leadership approach going forwards.
Is there an option to pre-order the book?
Yeah, so you can pre-order the book on Amazon. It's up. The page is up now. That was a personal milestone, having an Amazon page. I don't know why. I found that very exciting. But we have a page on Amazon. So if you go onto Amazon and search for Neuroinclusion, then our book will come up and you can pre-order it. And then, it will come through once it's released in March.
We obviously have a link below in any post, just taking people to the Amazon store so they can pre-order and just wait impatiently, which I will be definitely waiting impatiently for March to read it and get some incredible insights from you guys, from your work. It's great.
Yeah, thank you so much for working on this book. We discussed many topics from different angles. What would be one small step that people can take away from our conversation?
My small step, and I think the thing that I've learned through years of management and being a more inclusive leader, is to slow down, to be present. And a lot of our exercises and reflective exercises is to stop and reflect on yourself and what's going on for me, what are the assumptions I'm making, and what might I be protecting myself from. And I think that, for me, is the hardest and simplest thing to do at the moment in business.
I would echo that. I think for me, it's about the assumptions that we make, but specifically when we're communicating, because actually often communication is the place where things start to break down first. A simple example of that is, I remember a manager who I was working with who had told one of his team members that she needed to increase her profile with senior leaders and that she should go and introduce herself to some of the board members. And so she followed his instructions. She walked up to one of the board members in the corridor, blocking their way when they were on the way to a meeting, introduced herself, handed them a one-pager all about them, then started downloading information, thinking, well, she was following the instructions that she was given to introduce herself to the board member. The board member's response was, well, they got in my way when I was on the way to a meeting. They interrupted the conversation I was having with my colleague. She failed to understand the rules of engagement in the office. And so the individual in that case had done nothing wrong. She'd followed the instructions she was given, but the manager had failed to understand that the unwritten rules of the office weren't that obvious to her. It wasn't obvious to her that actually what he meant was put in 15 minutes with the board member to get to know them on a one-to-one basis, not go up to them in the corridor. From a managerial perspective, it's about getting crystal clear with your communication and not making assumptions about what people know or don't know or understand or don't understand or how they prefer to communicate or how they don't prefer to communicate. Just starting from a blanker sheet of paper can be really impactful in terms of relationships.
I always find checking in with people to see, do they need any more information? Is it clear? Because sometimes we may be assuming that we should understand everything. I shouldn't ask a question. I shouldn't ask a follow-up. But when the manager opens that door, that's much easier to say, actually, this is not really clear for me. Those are great, great tips. We have this little tradition. Towards the end, we ask a quick fire questions. This will be a very short, one word, one sentence answers.
So question number 1, what has surprised you the most during the research phase while writing this book?
How little research there is.
I would completely agree with that. When everything that we did in the book, we tried to base on research, and it's stunning how little good quality research there is in this space. It's coming, but it's yet to get there.
What's one thing neuro-inclusive leaders do differently in meeting?
I would say it's not about what they do in meetings. It's about what they do before meetings to prep.
What makes you hopeful that situation with neuro-inclusion will continue to improve in the companies?
It's getting headline coverage in the media on a consistent basis.
So you do feel hopeful?
Yeah.
What's a phrase managers should stop using if they want to truly be inclusive?
I know.
I would say
That's a
you
good one.
should is another one. You should do this. Well,
And the last question is, what is one small habit that neurodivergent teams can adopt to make a big difference?
Mine is to ask, what's your understanding of this?
I think there is this idea of creating a kind of manual of me. This is how I prefer to work. This is when I prefer to work. This is what I would like you to do when you work with me. These are my strengths. These are my challenges. And you can summarize that into a document that every team member shares so that it kind of promotes collaboration and understanding of each other's perspectives and helps to remove some of the frictions that can be created in teams. So for me, actually, just doing that simple exercise of people noting down how they like to work and increasing that understanding, awareness and empathy that people can have with each other can make a world of difference to how teams collaborate.
What I take away from this last answer is letting and allowing people to tell more about themselves, just beyond the title or the technical jobs they do, but to get to know the human behind the person.
For me, create space for communication, for openness, and apply empathy. We all people, although we're coming in and we're wearing these roles, this mask, the manager or a senior leader of the team, we're still human, we still have families. And, at the end of the day, that's the greatest connection we can have with each other.
Yeah. And I think trust is the cornerstone to all of this. Like, we don't intend to go into work and mess up. We don't intend to go in and upset the people we're working. The intentions are there on both sides. It's that positive intention that we learn about as coaches, that we're doing what we can with the resources that we've got and trusting individuals that they are trying to do what they can. And that takes time. That really does take time to be able to trust ourselves firstly. It all starts with ourselves. And then to be able to have trusting relationships with others. And that takes work, ongoing work.
I wanted to thank you for participating, and we're really looking forward with Anastasia to have this book, hopefully in March.
That's right.
And for our listeners, we will include the contact details of Sam and Liv in the podcast information. So hopefully the companies and people who would like to work with you will be able to get in touch.
Any managers listening, just pre-order the book. I feel that it's going to be a great resource to have, even if your company right now doesn't participate in or talks about or trains you in your inclusivity for your own progression, for your own growth. I think that will be a great resource to have.
We're really looking forward to the book coming out as well, and looking forward to hearing your feedback on it. And in the meantime, Sam and I are always happy to come in and speak to companies who are looking at doing better training for managers or helping to support people and raise awareness. So we've touched on some of the foundations of this is about people being aware of neurodiversity in the workplace and how that plays out. Thank you for having us.
Excellent.
Thank you for being here. It was great having you here. Everybody listening, just go pre-order the book.